Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McClernand, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, it is my pleasure this evening to welcome Hollywood Capone to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, John. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So first question, is Capone your last name, or is that also a nickname?
You know what? It's a composite.
Okay.
Nickname that I got some years ago, and Capone is actually my wife's maiden name, and I thought the two of them sounded great together, and that's really how I've been living for a while now.
That's awesome, because I'm sure there are some people that are like, is that really your name? And of course, Capone, the name Capone has some degree of notoriety to it because of a certain gentleman back in, what was it, about the 1930s, 40s, Chicago sort of thing?
Yeah, the fellow that didn't pay his taxes. But
yeah.
But it's funny, that name in Italy is a lot like Smith would be, or Johnson, or in America we have these names that are just names, and in Italy, there's this connotation here about it, but in Italy it's a name.
It's just a common name. So, and do you have some Italian heritage as well?
Yeah, I married into an Italian family. And,
okay.
And I'm thankful that I did. They're the greatest people that I've ever met in my whole life, and thankfully they gave me something wonderful that I couldn't buy with all the money in the world. So God bless it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And so, before being known as Hollywood, so we're going to rewind the clock here, but before being known as Hollywood, I think there's only one person that calls you by your actual name, or has in the past. And we did chat about this before hitting recording. Your real name is William, but only your mother has permission to call you that. Is that right?
Well, some people will call me some variation of it, but Mom owns the title on that. She's the one that
yeah,
and she'll do her thing, and we love Mom for that.
Absolutely. So before we dive into kind of your story, let's just let people know where you're at and kind of what you're doing now, because you're like a true artist and creative, and I think maybe we could say you got your finger in a lot of pies. What is it that you're up to these days?
Yeah, I'm all over the place, and that's a challenge in and of itself, because my wife laughs at me because I'm the type of person I have a great deal of difficulty sitting still and doing nothing. But with that in mind, at the moment, I'm writing my second book. I finished and published my first. I've got a rock band that I sing and play guitar in. I'm a professional photographer and videographer. I shoot different kinds of events and actors' headshots and portrait work and things like that. And in addition to that, I'm restoring an old hot rod that takes up a lot of my time too. So
really,
there's a lot of stuff going on in my world. But each and every one of those things that's going on in there is, thankfully, I'm very fortunate to have this ability to do that. It's something that I enjoy without end.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may ask, what's the model of hot rod that you're restoring?
I have a 1955 Chevy that my father bought secondhand in 1957, and he used it. I used it a bit when I was in high school, and then he let it sit derelict for 25 or 30 years. So a lot of rust, and floors had to be cut out and re-welded. And my son and I have done most of the work ourselves, and we're within spitting distance of putting this thing on the road and driving it around. So I'm very thankful that we've gotten this far with it.
Now, there's probably a lot of joy in sort of the building of it and whatnot, but then there's also a lot of fun in having the toy and being able to kind of play with it, so to speak, and to turn some heads along the way and maybe give some people some fun rides in it as well.
Oh yeah, no question about it. But there's the other part of it, which is developing a new vulgar language because you're working on a 70-year-old car that won't cooperate. So a lot of times you're laying on your back in the car, with magical words coming in your mouth, and it just sometimes it goes that way. But it's all a labor of love, and it's just like anything in life. The effort you put into it is what you will get out of it. And that applies to cars or music or cooking or anything you're going to do. Everything you do really revolves around the effort that you put into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, let's learn just a little bit more about your backstory. What's something that people might be surprised to learn about you?
Well, anybody that knows me probably won't be surprised about much, because there's really not many secrets in my life. But the obvious, or maybe the lack of being obvious, is that I have a lot of things going on, but I care deeply about all those things I have going on, and the people in my world too. Which, it's I'm 55 years old now, right? So my kids, my daughter recently got engaged. My son's in his mid-20s, and I never really thought when I got to this point in my life that my life would be where it is, and there's bad sides to it and good sides to it, but I never envisioned it like this, and the way it has evolved to where it is now is this wonderful thing where I'm surrounded by these wonderful people that are both my creation and come from the outside family too, and I feel like I'm the most fortunate person on the face of the earth.
That's amazing. So if we rewind the clock to before you were Hollywood, because what age were you when you picked up that nickname?
Oh, that's an interesting story. My wife and I, Nadia, moved to California back in the early 90s. I think we got there in 91 or 92. And our first real apartment was in Hollywood, right? So we were living this lifestyle. We lived in this apartment building. It was a lot like Melrose Place. Myself and the other tenants, we all knew each other. We'd go to parties together. The couple upstairs got married, and we went to their wedding. It was on a beach. A saxophone player that was playing in the band that was doing Chevy Chase's talk show was at the wedding on the beach. He's playing sax at sunset. I mean, it's just all this really cool stuff going on. So we were living that lifestyle. And when our son began to come along, because he was going to be our second child, we decided it would probably be the best thing to move back to New Jersey, because that's where all our family is. We didn't really people out there that we were connected to, as opposed to out here where everybody was out here. So when we moved back, I took a job at a car dealership in Paramus, old Cerami Pontiac, and the fellow that I was working for nicknamed me Hollywood, because I had, at the time, I mean, I wasn't wearing this. I had actual hair back then. I was very young, and I had this, and he nicknamed me Hollywood, and it just stuck. And him and I have remained friends to this day. We still work together occasionally doing various projects, and I do some video stuff for him. So it's, he shouts me out from across the room, he's like, Hollywood, and it's just how it goes in my world.
that stuck. All right. So, but prior to that, so you grew up in New Jersey, which is kind of like stuck underneath New York there, and in the big shadow of it there. But what was life like growing up there? Like, what do people think about New Jersey, and maybe what's something you'd like them to know about it that they might that might be a misconception?
Well, New Jersey is. I'll tell you the things I don't like about New Jersey, because that's the most evident in my head. Is that it's in the summertime, it's hot and it's humid, and in the wintertime it's cold and it's slushy and it's miserable. But there's a lot of really cool things here too. Like, there's a lot of people in New Jersey who play guitar and play in rock bands, and that has been a staple of my life since I was like 13, 14, 15 years old. And I've had this the fortune to run into people that have been fantastic players, not just guys getting by doing it, but I've always managed to run into people that were just very, very good at what they've done. And I've learned so much from them over the course of time, that one of the greatest gifts, I think, is being here, or at least in Bergen County, northern New Jersey, near New York City. A lot of very talented people that are out there doing that, and other creative things as well. And I'll tell you something else about New Jersey too. Most people, everybody thinks New York's got the greatest food, blah, blah, blah. And New York's got great food. But New Jersey has the greatest food. You can go to any corner deli in New Jersey. You can pull over to the side of the road. You can be starving. You say, I don't know where to go. Oh, look, there's a deli. And you pull over to the deli and you go in there and get a sandwich. Pretty safe bet it's going to be a banging sandwich.
Right. Okay, that's awesome, and it's funny to think, a slushy in the winter. I mean, it sounds kind of like a coastal city. That's what I expect: slushy in the winter, and then humid in the summer, and maybe some bad mosquitoes and things like that. So
a lot of mosquitoes.
Is it like it's nicknamed the Swamp, isn't it? Or Some reference to a swamp?
Well, I know Springsteen's got it refers to the swamps of Jersey, down south. And my mom's down at Lakewood. And that's pretty much generally the area that Springsteen's referring to, I think, when he's talking about it. And there's plenty of them down there. And I'll tell you what, when you get down there in them swamps, there's plenty of mosquitoes, too. You got to be careful. They're like really big, too. They'll grab you and they'll fly away with you.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. So before you were Hollywood, what did you do? How did you spend your time growing up?
I grew up. My father. This goes back to restoring the car. My father, early in my life, owned a couple gas stations, and he was the head mechanic there, and he was just grinding it out, and he made a pretty good living doing it. But he was working himself to the bone, and eventually, my mom convinced him to go back to school. He went to college. He got an engineering degree, and he wound up working for IBM and spent the second half of his life working for IBM and had a wonderful career with them. But being a part of that family where I grew up around a guy that knows every in and out nut and bolt on an automobile and basically passed that on down to me. And then later on was an engineering student and became very, very good at what he did. It gave me the opportunity I've always been around, cars, fast motorcycles, music. He turned me on to music when I was very young. He had like 8 tracks in his car when I was young, and, but it was always the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Pink Floyd and all this really cool 70s kind of stuff that, I don't listen to a lot of it today, but it molded me and set me on a direction for doing lots of things like writing music, writing songs, and telling stories and saying things in interesting ways, and then looking at life differently too. I look at life through a prism of my musical background and my mechanical background, and everything I do has some sort of is touched in some way by those things because those are the things I enjoy.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, it's funny you mentioned you do like videography and photography, and you do these things for actors. And when we think about actors, we don't usually New Jersey isn't usually the first name that kind of comes to mind. We might think of either Hollywood or maybe New York and Broadway. Those are probably the two most common. But this is something that you do in New Jersey. And what sort of demand is there for this kind of practice?
Actors' headshots, most people don't realize there's a lot of actors in New Jersey and a lot more in New York. I mean, my whole living isn't based around doing actors' headshots, but I do plenty of them.
Yeah.
I had this back in, I don't know, mid-2000s, 06, 07, something like that. I got it in me. I said, I want to be an actor. I want to try this.
Okay.
So I went to an acting school not far from me in Bloomfield called the New Jersey School of Dramatic Arts. And I went through their program, and I got a couple really, not great gigs out of it, but I got some decent gigs out of it. I won a number of auditions. I learned how to do the craft on obviously a lower level, but in the process of doing that, I met a lot of interesting people too. And I still kind of run in those circles to this day. So it's, again, it all has to do with the path you take in life and where your road takes you. And that's one of the roads that doing the things I do is taking me down. And again, I'm really fortunate to know these people.
Yeah. So somewhere along the way, you lost your best friend and decided to write a story about that. Well, tell me a little bit about your friend and the friendship you had prior to this happening.
Oh, I mean, you have people in your life that are there for long term, and Alan was one of those guys that he had been in my life for so long. I never really pictured my life without him. I met him in the 5th grade. His mom was my math teacher. I knew him through, that end of school up through middle school and through high school and all that. And we had this great relationship. All of our friends were interconnected. I mean, I still talk to some of the people I talked to in high school, to this day. And we still talk about him a lot because he was one of those people that you meet in life that you have no idea how he does it, but he is absolutely friends with every single person he met. And from Jump Street, we could go to a party where we knew nobody. And he would walk in the room and he would talk to everybody like he'd known them forever. And he would just, and I sit back in awe and look at this. I'm like, how does he do that?
Just a natural charisma and curiosity and desire and genuine interest in human beings.
Exactly. And that was this whole thing because he had very strong views, both political and life views and like that. And he wouldn't waver from those views. But what was cool about Alan is he always respected what your views were. Like I could have these knockdown, drag out fights with him and disagree with him, really getting down deep into the weeds. But, this would be happening on his porch while drinking a Yingling. And, and that's just what we would do. It was, he wasn't, I don't want to make him out like he wasn't flawed. He was flawed, just like we all are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alan had some serious flaws, but on the inside, he was probably one of the most interesting people I ever met. And when I had to say goodbye to him, it was a part of me was saying goodbye to me too, because he knew a side of me that really nobody else did, and I think that was just as hard as saying goodbye to him.
And I think that's actually a really remarkable insight, that when we lose somebody close to us that has had that kind of impact on our life, we lose a part of ourselves in that way. Isn't that both the beauty and tragedy of being human? How long ago was it that he passed?
He left us in October of 2019, so just before the pandemic, and that's how this whole book story kind of came about. I mean, my father knew him too, so there was an accident, and he fell off a roof, and but he didn't die instantly. He was mortally wounded, but he would linger for some days, and so while he was in the hospital in intensive care, I was going to see him, like every other day or so, and it's interesting because many of the people that we knew collectively, were reaching out to me for guidance. Hey, what's going on? What's the story here? And most of it I really didn't know. I would show up at the hospital, and every day would blend into the next, and there wasn't really anything positive happening. But my father knew him too, and at some point my father came with me to the hospital because he needed to see Alan and see what was going on, because he knew him just as long as I did, because we would come home together, and my father, my father was the responsible adult.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember the last conversation and interaction you had with him prior to the accident?
Oh yeah, like it was yesterday. His family owns a couple houses in a town up north of here, and they some of them are rentals and some of them they live in, and usually like every 10 years or so they paint them all. And Alan was the guy that was in charge of getting it all done. And he had some painters set up, and they were going from house to house painting him. And the day that he fell, he was he was sending me pictures about this one house they had. His father picked out this color. It was unbelievable, because it was so funny to me, because his father picked out this color, but it was like that fluorescent yellowish green that's like the color of like a DPW vest or something,
Yeah, and I'm thinking of like bile or something when you vomit.
We were having this back and forth texting, marathon about, what this color was. And it was and that was much of what him and I would do. We have this banter about, we would just crack jokes on stuff to death until there was nothing left in it. And, and that's what was going on. And then I sent him a text and I never got one back. And that would happen with him sometimes, because he would get tied up in something. But the very next morning, his mother sent me a text from his phone and told me what would happen. And that's how that all went down.
And did he live in the same town as you, or like?
No, that's another weird story. Him and I grew up in one town apart, but his mom was a teacher for the town that I grew up in. So as such, our school system was one of the best in New Jersey. So because she was, an employee of the school, they let her bring her son to that school. And that's how I met him. If she wasn't a teacher there, I never would have met him. He was a town over, and maybe I would have met him in later life, but I certainly wouldn't have met him in the fifth grade. And that started,
Yeah. So, and you were able to enjoy, I guess, 40 plus years of friendship with him.
Yeah. And, not all of it was perfect, but like sometimes I'm driving down the road, and because he had these little things that he would say that only he could get away with, and sometimes something would just pop up, and I would say, oh, I wonder what Alan would say about that. And what he would say would come into my head, and it just cracks me up. Sometimes I'm just driving down the road, I laugh to myself, because there's only one guy that would say that, and there's only one guy that would think it, because it's
right. And I think about those kind of thoughts, and we say this, he could get away with it, which means he's probably saying something somewhat controversial. However, those who would know him and know his heart and know the kind of person he is and the heart he had for people and connecting would realize that it's coming from sort of a jovial place in life.
Oh yeah. It's funny. A mutual friend of mine and his today that, we both knew in high school and all that. In fact, she must have been going through some things of his, not his, hers, but she found a couple old photographs from high school, like various parties and, and pictures of him. And she sent them to me on Facebook Messenger today. And it was kind of like oh yeah, I remember that guy. And it was just a cool thing to see. And I really appreciate her doing that for me.
There's something that comes to mind here. Very often when we lose somebody close to us, and we're going through grief and whatnot, people are afraid to talk about it. But I recall someone saying something that really touched me, and it was like, don't be afraid to talk about this person, because that's the way that we keep them alive.
Sure. And it's it's funny you mentioned keeping him alive, because I took some liberties. I mean, this book is something that was really it was a way of me kind of telling the story, not really to everybody else. I was really telling it to myself, because it started. I wanted to write one paragraph just to tell myself how I was feeling, so I could look at it, see what the words were, and see how that would affect me in a way that I could maybe better understand, because I was having a hard time with it. But that went on to 2 paragraphs, and that turned into a chapter, and then that turned into a second chapter, and this thing kind of took on a life of its own. Basically, me telling the story to myself, in the abstract. Some of it's fiction, mind you, but the story is all there, about what it meant. And then, you just mentioned, life and all that. My second book, I brought him back in my second book as a supporting character, just because I kind of wanted to have him around.
which is awesome. Did you ever, like growing up, did you ever think one day I'm going to write a book?
No. And I can't tell you how thankful I am that he gave me that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's quite something, I think we often look back on our life, I just ticked over 40, and maybe that's a contemplative time of life when I'm like, okay, maybe I'm halfway there. I didn't imagine this is where I'd be, but I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Oh.
I've got this beautiful little boy, an amazing wife, but boy, it's been a bumpy road to get here. So if we go back to, you get the text that Alan's been in an accident. What kind of runs through your head when you get that text?
Because I've known him for so long, I didn't think it was as severe as it was. I was thinking, man, because if you knew him, he was missing a couple fingers on one of his hands, because he put him in a chute of a lawnmower, and the rest is history. And those, it's just, that was Alan in a weird kind of way, I mean, I'd sometimes be out with him, and would be, putting gas in gas cans. I'd have 2 5-gallon gas cans at a gas station, putting gas in them, and he's sitting there with a lighted cigarette in his mouth with the gas pump and the thing going, whoo, and of course I'd be, what are you doing? But it's just, that's who he was. And so when she said he had an accident, I was thinking, oh, maybe broken arm, or he fell, or whatever the case was, and I really didn't appreciate the severity of it until I went to see him, and then it was a serious bummer for me.
Yeah. So, you go to the hospital, you're not quite sure what but you're expecting to see someone who's like injured, but you're going to be able to communicate with. Was he conscious or awake at this point, or was he was in an induced coma?
No, he never regained consciousness. It was, I mean, I detail it. I go over the description of it more in detail in the book. I don't really want to get too deep into the weeds with it here, but, it was pretty obvious to me when I saw him immediately that he had some very serious challenges ahead of him, and none of it looked good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And kind of thinking about what's going through your head at that time, and you think that last text message conversation might be the last one. Did that run through your head at that time?
Yeah, it did, and it was there was so many things running through my head at that time, because he was one of those guys one of those people that are in your life that they're in there all the time. And like for me, I just never expected to at some point not have him around. It was like, because he was one of these guys, man, he would piss me off. Sometimes at like 4:30 in the morning, I'd get text on my phone.
Yeah.
And I look, and it'd be some goofy meme he's sending me or something like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, oh man, come on, it's 4:30 in the morning, buddy. What are you doing to me here? But I'd give anything for one of those texts right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just speaks to the impact he's had in your life. And so, um, as kind of the days are, he's in the hospital, the days are sort of passing, and you're kind of aware of what's coming, and it's only maybe a matter of time. How did you pass those days?
I was in a daze. It got more as I kept going to the hospital. It got more habitual. I was just going there, just to check in. The first day or two, I saw what I saw, but I had hope.
Mm-hmm.
But after a few days of doing that, it really started to become evident that there probably wasn't going to be a good resolution to this, and eventually his parents came to that same conclusion, and they stopped the charade.
Mm-hmm.
It was it just had to end at some point, and they did, and I'm sure they were devastated by that, and I wish it was different, but it wasn't, and it was what it was, and when it all came crashing down, here's I don't know if I want to get too far into this, but I'll start by saying this: the last time I saw him physically was the day that he passed, and it was this weird set of circumstances. I took my dad to the hospital with me, and they had him in intensive care. So there's like these curtains that kind of close the room for privacy, but they can fling them open in a second,
Mm-hmm.
There was a nurse in there, and I heard her wrapping up with his parents, just kind of casually. There was like no rush or anything like that. So when she came out, she opened the curtains, and I saw him, and they had him up in the bed, like they brought the bed up, so almost
Mm-hmm.
like he talked to somebody or something, or watch TV or whatever. And I walked in, and the none of the equipment was on him anymore. The heart monitor, none of the feeding tube, none of that stuff was on him anymore. And at first, I thought, hey, this is horrible. At first, I was like, oh my God, he's up, he's awake. And then the more I looked at him, the more I realized that wasn't the case. He wasn't breathing. His skin looked colorless, like
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
the body, and he was gone. And that was
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you're kind of in a tough spot at that time, because now it's real, it's final, and any last shred of hope is now gone. And now begins the process of grieving. When you went home that day, how did that go for you? What did you find yourself doing?
I was angry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah. And, and man, I feel that. I can just imagine. So you're, kind of angry at the world, angry at, just the fact that you'd had this person that was so meant so much to you was just kind of ripped away from you, kind of unexpectedly, and you didn't, because I think about anger very often as like this, almost like a protective emotion, that it was like maybe trying to protect from the pain that you were feeling.
Well, you know what it is with him is that he was really the last guy that knew that other side of me. I mean, I wasn't a perfect kid growing up. I got into a lot of trouble. I was I had a rough childhood. I came from parents that loved me, but I did my own thing. I worked on cars. I ran with bad kids because they were fun. It's not like we were thieves or anything like that, but I'd race around in my hot rods and get tickets and get pulled over and spend a night in jail here and there. And it's just what happened. We weren't felons or murderers or anything, but we like to have a good time. Sometimes we took it too far, But
Yeah.
he was one of the last people that knew that side of me. When I met my would-be wife, at that point there was a turning point in my life where I began to at least head towards being a civilized human being.
Take life somewhat.
That led that way, but up to there, nobody really knows me in that realm except for him. And then when he was gone, that's a big part of where my anger was, because sometimes I like to look back at that kid and see who he was, and Alan would remind me who that kid was. Sometimes I'd be sitting there on his porch drinking a Yingling with him, and crying about how my life is terrible. Oh, I want more money, or I want, this job or that job or whatever it is I'm complaining about. And he would set me down. He would set me straight, and he would remind me of where I came from.
Right.
Came from, Billy. It's look where you are, and he was that kind of equalizer for me that I don't have anymore for that segment of my life. There's other wonderful things in my life. I don't mean to short that. It's just that's that one little section that I'm never going to get back, and I that's a lot of that anger was directed at that.
Yeah. And I want to maybe just take a little bit of a sidetrack here. You mentioned your wife Nadia, and how did you meet her?
My other friend Tommy, who I've known for almost as long as Alan, he and I were being ridiculous. We were going down to a party at my cousin's house in South Jersey, down the shore. And we're driving this old beat up car down there, and we saw this other car with these two cute girls in it and some other guy in the back seat. And, we were just kind of flirting driving down the parkway. And there was this thing for a while, like on the parkway, see somebody cute, you pay their toll for them. And I just thought it was kind of, a cute thing to do or whatever. Anyway, I don't know if that worked out pound for pound, but we wound up following them to where they were going, and they were going to a place down South Jersey called Seaside Heights. So we followed them down there, and the flirting was kind of cool up until I think that we followed them down the seaside, because then they were looking at us like, all right, what's up with these guys? Now we're stalkers, So we tried to chat with them a little bit, and Tommy and I weren't going down to Seaside. We weren't going to burn a lot of time trying to meet people that weren't really interested in meeting us. And we got the vibe, And but I said, you know what? I think that girl's really cute, and I liked her even for the 2 seconds I talked to her. I'm like, I'm going to leave my phone number on her car. So I left my phone number under a windshield wiper, right, on this like bag that was laying on the pavement or something, And a week or so later, she called me.
Wow.
And that's how I met my wife.
That's quite something. So a phone number left under a windshield wiper on a car, and for some reason she decided to call. And this is pre-cell phone, mind you.
Yeah, this is like dial it up in your house. Doot, 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 doot. Hello.
So did you ever ask her like how many times she called before? Because maybe she called and you weren't there, or did you have an answering machine? Or
well, no, it was a weird. I was out of high school, but barely. I was staying with my grandmother in a town far from where I grew up. This is out in Morris County. And but I left my grandmother's phone over there, and she called one night. My grandmother comes to me, and she's like, oh, this is a telephone call for you. And like, I really didn't talk to too many people. Like, one of my friends would call, but they'd only call like if there was a party going on that weekend or something like that, whatever. And so I started talking to her on the phone, and we couldn't stop talking. We talked like every night for until we met up again, and then after that, it was just, we had this connection that it was deep, and it was almost immediate, and it was wonderful. And I'm so glad. And another twist of fate that happened in my life that I totally don't deserve.
Yeah.
And she's here with me to this day, and I love her so much.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I'm curious, when you're flirting with her, and I was trying to get the picture right. Like, you and your buddy Tommy are in one car. Was she driving the other car with like herself and some guy and another girl, or?
Yeah, well, she was driving, and she was with her Robin, who was with this other guy, and I can't remember that guy's name because he disappeared shortly after that. But her and her friend Robin were longtime friends, and they were going down just to spend a day down at the beach and kind of goof around at the boardwalk and stuff like that. And they never expected to, meet us. And I'm kind of glad they did. So here we are.
Right. So it's the first time that she calls you. I mean, she doesn't know exactly who she's calling. You had a bit of a funny little flirt, in the car and whatnot. What did she say?
We talked about everything. And that was what was so cool, because they got into conversation. You're like, hi, I'm Nadia. Hi, I'm Billy. Hey, how you doing? Oh, yeah, I got your number off your car. Blah, blah, blah. Hey, what's going on? Where are you guys from? What do you do? Where do you go to school? And just these all small talkeries, until it got into things that we liked. And then next thing I know, we're talking about, we like the same kind of music, and, we like the same kind of films, and, what do you do for fun? And it's a lot of the things just kind of clicked. It was just start checking off boxes like, okay, that's cool. Okay, that's cool. Okay, that's cool. That's good. And then I think it was not long after that, a few weeks or so after that, I was having a Memorial Day party, and I invited her to the Memorial Day party. And the Memorial Day party, we hung out. It was the first time we kissed, and it's been game on.
Right. So, you would have called her up. Did you have like, I'm trying to think, because like when I started communicating with my wife, we had the benefit of the internet. It wasn't great, but we had it. We had a functioning version of the internet that kids these days, they would have no appreciation for. But anyway, so we had a functioning version of the internet where we could kind of communicate, and we could email, and we used MSN Messenger, so you could kind of message back and forth. And But back then, did you have to like arrange like, hey, I'm going to call you at this time, and then if that's the case, then you got to be sitting by the phone in case it rings? Like, what was that like?
There was some of that, but there was some of I told her where I worked, and I was working at a gas station, which was right off the highway, so it wasn't terribly hard to get to. She lived in a town in New Jersey called Hasbrook Heights, and she was right near Route 80. And if you got on Route 80 and drove for about a half an hour, you could get off at the right exit, and the gas station I was working at was right there. So
Okay.
sometimes she would, stop by the gas station, and then, we'd have a little chat and, a couple kisses in the parking lot or something. And it was cool. And that's kind of how we would communicate, either by the telephone, or sometimes she would come by after work or something, or like on a Friday night, come up, we go out or something. And it began this relationship where we just spent more and more time with each other until it got into the point where we couldn't spend enough time with each other.
Yeah, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, I love that. It's a beautiful story. What was she attracted to about you? What did she tell you that she was like, this is why I wanted?
I think she was attracted to the fact that, well, I mean, I'm old and worn out now, but at the time I was a pretty good looking dude, and had good hair,
Yeah.
and I played in a rock band. I played guitar and I sang songs, so there was some of that going on. She liked that, a confident guy, knows about cars, gentle with a woman,
Yeah.
respectful, sings, writes songs, plays in a rock band. I mean, what else are you looking for when you're 21?
Yeah. How long did you date before you ended up getting married?
Well, we started dating in 86, and then we got married in 91. So that's 5 years ish.
Okay. Yeah. How did you propose to her?
It was kind of like one of those things where I was at a point where I just didn't want to let her get away. And I bought a ring and brought it home, and we were both living together in the apartment at the time. And I was out in the hallway, and I just asked her, I said, look, I got this ring, and I want you to marry me. And I don't know, what do you think of this idea? And she said yes right away. She was like, of course, this is, so it was pretty cool.
This is the natural progression of the relationship.
It was wonderful. It was, I couldn't believe she said yes. It was, because there's so many things in my life, John. I can't tell you, I don't deserve any of them. I'm just a guy. I'm just some guy that just bounces around, and somehow I wind up in these situations where I don't deserve to be there, but yet I am there, and I'm around these wonderful people, and it's a blessing. It's this life doesn't owe me anything. It really doesn't. If this life ended for me tomorrow, I'd be the one that owes it something.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. And you had a couple kids together, and now they're older. You said your daughter's engaged, your son's in his mid-20s and whatnot. Obviously, your wife would have known your friend Alan as well.
Oh, she's known Alan since she started dating me.
Yeah.
Here's what I mean. Alan and her were friends, but obviously, she wasn't friend with Alan like I.
Sure, of course.
Because Alan has this way of, at some point, there's too much of Alan. And
Yeah.
and people that don't know him or aren't connected to him the way I was connected to him, may have that. And not to say that's a bad thing, because at some point there was too much Alan, even me sometimes. But I loved him so much I could put up with him, But
Right, yeah.
But they had a warm, wonderful relationship. Nadi was terribly saddened when Alan passed away, and it was just one of those things. Even for her too, is one of the first friends of mine that she had met when she started dating me. So we all ran in these circles back then. We all had like friends that, like, her group of friends met my group of friends, and all of a sudden her group of friends were hanging out with my group of friends. So this kind of just kept mixing up until we had this larger group of friends. It was, and when he passed, obviously she was saddened by that terribly.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you support each other in the grieving process as you were kind of going through that?
Well, she knew I was having a hard time with it, but she also knew that my life wasn't just going to stop on a dime, and the world wasn't going to let me brood over this. I had to get up every day and go to work and do the things I had to do. And this was at a weird time too, because it was just before the pandemic. I didn't start writing the book until we got into the pandemic, and then it became more of an obsession for me to just kind of grind it out. And thankfully I had the time to do that during that period. I was off, wasn't really doing much of anything for a couple months probably, and that was the time that gave me a really good head start on this. And by the time things started to get back to normal, I was well on my way with it, and the end was in sight.
Yeah, and so you started writing the book, The Ashes.
That's true.
Yeah.
The motivation behind it obviously was the loss of my friend, but it was also, like I was saying earlier, is a big part of it was a loss of a piece of me that I'm never back. It's a side of me that I could discuss with him, and we could laugh and joke about it, and same thing with him too, but nobody else really knew that side, and it's something that now that side of me is gone, no one else will ever know it. It's out there with the molecules.
Right. But some of it has been preserved in the writing of this book. How did you find going through the process of writing it? I wonder if there were some days where it was just really, really emotional trying to write it, and other days, you felt inspired. What was that like?
Well, some days I was bawling my eyes out.
Yeah.
Some of it was terrible, but I had it in my head. I can't be more clear about this. That book practically wrote itself. It just went from one thing to the other, and the reason that is because it's part nonfiction and part fiction. I kind of interweave the two things together. Both sides of it tell the story. The nonfiction side tells the story of him and his demise, as well as the fictional side. But it's when I started to interweave those two things together is really where it started to take a path for me. And once I got on that path, I kind of knew where I was going to go with it. I mean, I didn't know exactly how it was going to end, but I knew that at some point I at least knew where I was navigating towards.
And what did your wife think when you told her you were going to write a book?
I didn't tell her I was going to write it. I just started doing it. And then when I finished it, I mean, she knew it was going on. And but when I finished it, this was the thing that gave me some sort of validity, because Nadia is one of these people where if I wrote something and let her read it and she felt it was like kind of ho-hum, she'd be like, well, it's all right. And, much to my,
chagrin,
ego, the blow that I would take, I'd have to eat it and smile. That's not the way it went. I let her read it. She came back to me, like, baby, she's like, I couldn't put it down. She's like, that was really, really cool. And I wasn't going to publish it up to then. I just wrote it something for me to kind of explain what in the hell was going on in my world. And when she said that to me, I said, you know what? I'm going to grind this out. I'm going to proofread it. I'm going to get rid of all the, grammatical errors, and I'm going to publish this thing. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. Have you got a copy of the book with you?
I do. It's that's the front cover.
Yeah. For those that are watching, for those that are listening on the podcast version of this, he's holding up. It's
right there.
That looks like an old car there. What's the car on the cover there?
That was my old 68 Chevelle. And
okay.
I used to take that down the shore, or anywhere for that matter, and just rip around and burn the tires off of it and be ridiculous. We used to go on these camping trips. That's me on the back too. Little plug there. But we used to go down to Forked River and camp there on like large weekends, like Memorial Day weekend or like Labor Day weekend, things like that. And it would just be, a huge party down there. And that's what we do. We'd go down there, we'd camp, we'd stay the whole weekend, we'd bring the cars down there, we'd race around, and it was just some of the best times of life. And I mean, you can't do that stuff now. There's all sorts of rules and regulations. Chase out there. Back then, pretty much anything goes.
Yeah. So, what's next for Hollywood?
My new book is on the horizon. I have it. I want to say I'm probably about halfway through with it. It's a story that's not really related to this book at all, but I took the liberty of bringing Alan back in it because I wanted to have him around in some capacity. And since I don't have him in the real world, I put him in the fictional one. And he's got a cool character. Basically, he plays himself. And him and I are buds, or not him and I, but the main character and him are buds. And I write it from a third person, and I'm having so much fun with it. I want to get finished with it at some point, but also I'm having so much fun with it that I'm not really quite ready to let it go just yet.
Yeah.
It's place, and it's on the way to doing that. And the story is about a bunch of high school kids that save the world.
Okay.
But without giving too much of it away, Alan's in it. He's a great character in it, and there's some very diabolical people in it too. There's off-worlders from another planet that try and take the world over, but they do it through like politics. Like they're in the pockets of like United States senators, and there's all this other mayhem that goes on that's related to that. And some of these names you'll recognize. They're known, or maybe I don't use their names, but they're known political quantities. And
people can put two and two together, is what you're saying.
People be able to put two and two together and figure out who I'm leaning towards here, and on both sides. I'm not picking a side on this thing. They're both sides of it are pretty diabolical, so we're going after them all.
Yeah. So it's 3 years on from the time of Alan's passing, and grief is quite the process. You went through the process of writing the book, and I imagine that felt somewhat cathartic. What's the grief like for you these days?
I'm cool with it, as far as living my life. I mean, I miss my friend. Mm-hmm. There's no question about it. I miss him terribly. Like I said, sometimes I'm driving down the road, or I'll see something or I'll hear something, and I know he would have a very unique Alanism for that. And and it just pops into my head. Sometimes I'm just laughing by myself. But writing the book for me was absolutely the best therapy that I could possibly have, because it did a couple of things. One, it closed that chapter, even though I didn't want that chapter closed. It helped me get it closed because it needed to be closed. And but also, by writing the book, I took a very, very strong gift away from that, and I am incredibly thankful for him.
Yeah,
for giving me that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if he was, I mean, you knew him better than probably almost anyone else in the world, and if he was seeing what you're doing, today and whatnot, what would he like to say? What do you imagine him saying?
He wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
He would pat me on the back. He would say something like, "Holy, this is great," or he would say something relative to the reality of it. He wouldn't sugarcoat it. If he didn't like it, he would say so. But I'm pretty sure he would like it, because the only way he wouldn't like something is that it offended him. And by offending, the only way to offend Alan was to really be an a-hole.
Right.
You could be anybody you want. You could be gay, straight, Democrat, Republican, black, white, Catholic, Jewish. It did not matter to that guy. He would take you in just like he would take in anybody else as far as his sphere goes. But if you were an a-hole, he really didn't want anything to do with you. And they come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah. Well, Hollywood, it's been an absolute pleasure just sharing this conversation, reminiscing. I can feel sort of the love that you had for your friend, and kind of the journey that you've been on. You're a creative, you're a storyteller, and it's amazing that you get to do this kind of in your life now. If you were to offer just some words of wisdom, just a thought or a nugget that if people could take something away from this conversation, what would you like them to take away from it?
Oh, it's real simple. Those people that are in your life that you see every day, really care about, those people that you love, that you have not told that you love for a long time or at all, you need to say those words. You need to just acknowledge them, or just make a mental note that, this person is in my world. I'm really grateful that they are here, because the truth of it is, tomorrow is not guaranteed. You could wake up tomorrow and it could be a whole different landscape out there, and everything could change in the blink of an eye, and you will not see it coming. And I'm not saying that it will, but I'm saying that if you go through your life and you tell these people that you love them and care for them, and the people that you care for acknowledge that and accept their love in return, you'll be a happy person for it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for letting me say the words.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.